Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining so promptly. We'll just wait for a few seconds for a few more people to join, so bear with us a moment. Hope all is well with you. It's a bit cold down in the southwest, so I can only imagine how cold it is in the north. Keeping warm. Okay, so we'll start with just a general introduction, and I'm sure others will join over the next few moments. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for today's event. It's absolutely great to see so many, even now, as people are starting to join, so many of you here today. I'd like to start thanking you for everything you do to support the school sector. Without you, children are just simply not going to get the education they rightly deserve. And I absolutely know times are challenging in so many respects. And as ever, I'm in awe of everything you do. And I don't say that lightly. Today is all about offering you support during these tough times. You are definitely not on your own. Before we start, I'd really like to get a feel of who's in the virtual room today. So there's a Menti link in the right in the chat. So could you just let me know where you're from today using the poll link? So it just explains what setting you're from, and it just gives us a sense of how to pitch the rest of the talk. So do link into that. While you're answering, what we will start to do is move on to our first speaker, and that's going to be David Withy, who's our Chief Executive Officer, who started in the Education, Skills and Funding Agency in August of last year. And he's going to talk about his reflections of the last year. I'm afraid, and very unfortunately, and he sends these huge apologies, he's not here in person, but he has taken the time to record a video for us. So could I ask colleagues to load the video? And if you could complete the Menti while you're waiting, that would be great too. Thank you very much. Over to David.
Hello. I'm David Withy. I'm Chief Executive of the Education and Skills Funding Agency. I'm here today to welcome you to the Academy Finance Professionals Annual Conference for 2023. I'd like to start by saying I'm very sorry I can't be with you today in person. The group of Academy Finance Professionals do fantastic and crucial work to support better outcomes for children and young people across our system. And it's a lovely chance to come together and reflect on the challenges and achievements of this group over the last year. So while I can't join you in person today, I did want to take the opportunity to say thank you very much. Thank you for all that you do on a day-to-day basis to support better outcomes for children and young people in the system and to work with us to ensure that every pound that we spend on education goes to support better outcomes for those young people. It's amazing to think it's been a year since our last conference in November 2022. Time flies, particularly when you're facing into a number of really significant challenges, as I know many of you have done over the last year. When we met in November 2022, the ESFA had been making a number of changes to its organisation and its focus following an arm's length body review. That gave us a chance to really focus on creating a clear and strategic purpose for the organisation and a forward plan for the organisation. Fast forward a year to now, and we are fully immersed in delivering that vision, which is for every pound spent on education and skills in England to have the greatest possible impact on ensuring that every single learner can realise their potential. And this vision underpins everything that we do. And as finance professionals, you play an absolutely critical role in helping us to ensure that the £67 billion that we spend on education and skills across the education and skills sector in England goes as far as possible to support that vision. Our role is a dual role in some respects. We have regulatory functions, and those are really important, but we also have a role as a service provider. And so part of what guides us in our day-to-day work is making sure that we are helping you as Academy Finance Professionals to do the right thing. We've sought to create the right environment for you to deliver world-class education opportunities for all of the students within your care. And when I spoke last year, I talked about how we are aiming to do that, framed around really 3 key outcomes for the organisation. Firstly, providing certainty to you in terms of your funding and the environment in which you operate. That's not always easy. I think we've seen this year with RAC, with the error made in respect of the NFF, that certainty is not always felt immediately to hand. But we have done some really good work, particularly around the budget forecast review timetable, particularly around some of the guidance that we've sought to offer to create clarity and certainty around how some of our processes work with trust quality indicators, and work that we've done on simplifying the process of Academy financial oversight through the slimmed down Academy Trust Handbook, hopefully has made it feel that there has been some increasing certainty emerging. This is a big part of our second outcome, which is making sure you feel well supported, making sure you have access to high quality, timely, relevant support and guidance with really clear instructions that help you protect against financial difficulty. Our school resource management programme continues to return really good feedback in terms of the quality of our customer experience. 92% of you say that you found the SRMA process helpful and constructive. And we want to continue to work with you to ensure that our SRM products are able to support the building of capability across the system. Because as I think about how I take my assurance across the £67 billion spent in this space, it is as much driven by an understanding and a belief that the sector has the capability, the support, the understanding to be able to do your jobs properly, and being able to work with this group on ensuring that is a big part of our focus, has been a big part of our focus this year and certainly will next year as well. It's important we get that all right because ultimately our third outcome is providing the necessary assurance that every pound is well spent and realises value for money. And I know that's an endeavour that we work very closely together on. And genuinely, the real highlight of my first 15 months in the role here at the ESFA has been the opportunity to get out and about as much as possible, to meet many of you firsthand and have conversations about how we can help support school finance professionals in driving improvements in the sector. So I'm really pleased to be able to open today's event, which provides a really great platform, I hope, for you to come together, engage and share best practice, because ultimately you are the ones with many of the answers. It's great to see so many of you here, and it's also really good to see such a busy agenda for today. You're going to hear from a range of speakers, including Tanya Arkle from the ESFA and many colleagues from our school resource management programme, asking you what else we can do to support you, and sharing some details of our up-to-date SRM offer and capability offer. We've also got Tom Goldman here from the department's funding policy unit discussing the current position on school finance. I know this is an issue that many of you will want to talk about, and it continues to guide lots of the conversations we have internally as well. And I'm also delighted to welcome our guest speaker this afternoon, Paul Rickard, Chief Executive Officer of the Durham and Newcastle Diocesan Learning Trust, who's going to provide a really valuable first-hand account of how trusts can manage changing pupil demographics, and also talk about the benefits of rural schools being part of a trust as well. We're also going to end with a panel discussion, which gives a bit of an opportunity to take part in a question and answer session with various members of the team. It goes without saying that we really value hearing your thoughts, hearing your questions, hearing your ideas about how we can make sure we are delivering against those 3 outcomes. So I'd really encourage as many of you as possible to ask our panel members any questions you might have. So thank you in advance for everything you do today to share your thoughts, your experiences, your perspectives. And I really hope you take away some valuable insights from the day. So thank you very much. Enjoy the day and look forward to seeing you soon.
I hope you enjoyed hearing from David and the ESFA's key outcomes, which are certainty, support and assurance. And no pressure, colleagues, for the rest of the day. He's set us up quite well, hasn't he? So I know David ran through the agenda, but it's also on the screen now, so you can have a quick look at it. And I'm hugely grateful to everyone who's taking part today, because I know they're all very busy as well. Whenever I go to a conference, many of you tell me you struggle to take time out for professional development. We want to make this easier for you, so I hope that at the end of this session, you will know more about the tools and support we offer to help you deal with your many challenges. You can ask questions in the chat. We've got experts on hand to answer as many as possible, and we will get through as many as we possibly can. So do ask, and we'll do what we can during the course of the next couple of hours or so. As David mentioned, you're also going to have an opportunity to ask the panel of experts a question in the chat. So why don't I just briefly introduce them so you can have a quick think about the questions you're going to put forward. So I'd like to introduce, by the way, all of these biographies are in your pack, so you'll be able to have a look in a bit more detail. So we've got Kevin Sampeth. Good morning, Kevin. I know you're here, Deputy Director for School Financial Support and Oversight in the Midlands and South West. We've got Alison Perry, who heads up the School Resource Management Advisor team. Good morning, Alison. Bryn Logan Meredith, he's the head of region for Yorkshire and Humber, but he's got particular responsibility today for revenue aspects of RAC. So if you have any questions about that, just to be clear, that's not capital, it's revenue. And of course, we've got Tom Goldman. We tend to travel in pairs, don't we, Tom? You and I. He's the Deputy Director responsible for funding policy. So I'm sure many of you will have lots of questions for him. So do have a think about what you might want to ask them over the next few minutes and hours. So let's move on. There should now also be a Menti in the chat. And what we want to know from you now is how can we support you to spend your funding in the most effective and efficient way to maximise your resources? It'd be really good to get a sense of what's on your mind at the moment in this space, because everything we've done in the school resource management portfolio has been done in partnership with you. You've told us what you need, want, and would like to see us help you with, and we have tried to develop those products with you. So this is not government telling you what we think you need. This is you telling us and us working together to get the best outcomes for everyone. And while you're completing that Menti, I'd just like to talk about what we've been doing in the Academy Finance Professional Power Hours, which run monthly. These are free, of course, they're virtual and they're easy to access. In the last academic year, we've seen over 4,000 attendees at our Power Hour events. We ran a range of sessions on budget forecast returns, counter fraud, related party transactions, and HMRC joined us for a session on VAT. We also recently ran a networking session and welcomed key speakers from Embark Federation, Olive Academies Trust, Bourne Education Trust, and the Link Academies Trust. The feedback we've received is really encouraging. You told us it was a great event and an opportunity to network, really in-depth sessions, and very good and informative. So we think we're getting it right, but if we're not, tell us, and we'll do what we can to make sure it is right. So during the course of today, drop us a line in the chat if you think there's something missing from our offer of support. So maybe we can have a quick look at the Menti. We've got 13 responses so far. Some of these may be picked up in the panel session as well. So if I don't cover them now over the next few minutes on the support offer from School Resource Management, maybe colleagues in the panel can have a quick look at these as well. So I'm just going to pick a few. Hopefully it'll stop moving so my eyes can focus. Encouraging more collaboration across local trusts, not just at top level. Local conferences, local networking. This is something we hear a lot, and hopefully by the end of today we can give you a sense of what we can offer here. SEN funding, particular national funding, is a key concern from my networks. It needs to be far more clear and far more training on this available. That's something I hear a lot when I'm out and about, and I know David does as well. So we'll reflect on that definitely. Give us plenty of notice around future funding levels or specific restricted grants, as the more time we have to plan, spend, the more likely it is to be done efficiently. I know Tom has some comments on that. We had a local authority event yesterday, and this was a question that came up yesterday. One of the pointers I would suggest you have a look at is your pupil numbers over the next few years. This is probably one of the biggest impacts on your funding. So do have a think about that and work with colleagues. Better deals with suppliers. I think we can probably touch on that later. Easier access to training that can be completed any time. It's a really good one. Increases in some funding in line with cost increases of support. What else have we got? Ideas to spend pupil premium funding effectively. Clarity on NTP funding. So a real theme on SEND coming forward. I'm wondering if colleagues could just scroll up a little so I can see the ones that were made earlier. Give us more, allow for teacher progression payments, better support for procurement at school level, running a special school with around 83% free school meals. You could give some funding to cover that cost. More knowledge about what the future funding is to help plan in a more detailed way the spending for each of our schools in line with asset management. Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. We will have a look at those in slower time after today, but colleagues in the panel, maybe you can have a look at those and pick up some of those themes. So thank you very much for those who completed that form. It's really useful, intelligent and information. So I thought drawing on some of those themes would be really helpful maybe, and some of you may very well be aware of these tools and may very well have used them, but perhaps what I can do just briefly is to give you a sense of what the school resource management offer is all about. So I'm going to just ask colleagues to put a new slide up for us. All of this is available, all of the support, advice, guidance is available on gov.uk. You will be able to access not only contact details for how to access the tools, but there is also some case studies which you also may find useful. So these are academy trusts, single academy trusts, maintained schools, local authorities who've been through some of the experiences, particularly around the deployment of school resource management advisors, but not exclusively so. And hopefully you'll be able to learn from some of those collective experiences as well. So the offer, I'm just waiting for colleagues to pop the slide in, but not to worry if we can't do that. So the offer covers a range of support mechanisms. I'm just slightly scared that I've now got my face on the screen twice, which is always scary. So first of all, understanding your data. Many of you, I'm sure, will have used the benchmarking data that's provided by the VMFI tool. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so please do access these tools, the benchmarking data. Now, it could be that the profile you end up seeing for your school, so you're benchmarked against similar schools, similar settings and similar geographical locations. You could end up with a very high spend or a very low spend, depending on what the category is. This isn't necessarily a problem if you've consciously made a decision that that is the right thing for your trust. The data is not there to solve your problems, it's there to give you something to consider and think of where is the best place to put your resources. So do have a look if you haven't already. We get very good feedback from it. Clearly it is retrospective, looking backwards on the returns that we get, so there is a limit to it, but equally it does give you a starting point. Many of you in the Menti talked about best value procurement, and we have a range of deals that cover a whole raft of different issues that you will have to provide for your schools. And this is a really good opportunity for you to have a look to see whether you can minimise the amount of front loading to arrange those contracts. Obviously with a bigger procurement power, there comes better deals. So do have a look at what's on offer. And there is a lot of information on gov.uk, but there is also a contact detail with an SLA, service level agreement, to get back to you within 48 hours with the best opportunity you've got. This may not be for everyone. You may have local deals that are much cheaper, effective, and we're not going to cut across those. It's an opportunity for you to have a look at and make the decisions. We talk about better use of technology. Clearly, in the wake of COVID and hybrid technology, virtual as well as in person, there is opportunity there for schools to make best use of the digital guidance and frameworks and tools provided. With that technology clearly comes risk. And so there is also some guidance around cybersecurity. And please do sign up to the SRM newsletter where we can give you alerts if that is something that you would find helpful. We also give support for school business professionals. This is something that Pete's going to come on to shortly. We know, and you tell me regularly, that what you want is the support in real time to help you deal and meet the challenges that you currently face. I said at the beginning, you're not on your own, and you absolutely are not. I'm not going to go too much into this now because I know Pete's going to cover it, but for example, we offer technical bursaries for technical qualifications and also peer-to-peer support from experienced CEOs, finance, business professionals to those who are newly entering the sector. The school estate management, clearly we've got someone who's going to be talking at the panel on RAC issues, on revenue, but managing your school estate is obviously critical. Decisions made can often influence how much money you're going to have to spend in the longer term on your assets. So sometimes you need a bit of help in making those decisions. GEMS, the Good Estate Management Guide, will help, but we also have deployments of capital advisors. At the moment, this is piloting, so it's not extensive, but we're in the process of rolling it out, who can help your leadership team make those decisions. And then, of course, we've got school workforce accessing hands-on support, so not only the guidance on offer in gov.uk, but of course our brilliant school resource management advisors who are there to help support your school in a whole range of different ways. And the use of integrated curriculum financial planning, there's lots of guidance on how to do that, but obviously our school resource management advisors can also help. So this tool about matching your resources with your priority outcomes for education is well accepted across the industry, and we can help support that if it's something that you're not particularly familiar with now. So we want this offer to be the best it can possibly be. It's not stagnant, it's constantly evolving. And for those that have been using our tools for the last 2 or 3 years will have noticed we've embraced both capital and digital developments, and we will continue to do that. And that's why events like today are so vital, so that we can continue having this conversation in real time. To give you an example of some of the feedback that you've given us recently and the changes we've made since I last spoke to you, you told us that you valued the support you received through the School Resource Management Advisors, the SRMA programme. 92% of respondents to our 2023 survey reported their experience of an SRMA visit as good or very good, and 89% advising that they found the recommendations useful. However, we also heard that the programme didn't offer you enough flexibility. Sometimes a full deployment, you didn't want that, you didn't need it. So we've now introduced tailored SRMA visits. These focus on 1 or 2 specific areas of school resource management, and that can include forecasting, pupil numbers, integrated curriculum and financial planning, ICFP, such as I've mentioned previously, HR and recruitment, and costings and budgeting for school improvement priorities, for example. But that list isn't exclusive. You can put anything to us using the contact details, and we'll definitely consider whether it's appropriate to deploy an SRMA to you. We know that you find having peer-to-peer support useful, so we've now introduced a cost-free one-to-one mentoring opportunity via the SRMA programme. We keep hearing again and again that accessing CPD is a real challenge across the sector. And we know that there are specific areas that you are interested in learning more about. So we've introduced new modules to our free to attend SRMA training webinars, which Pete will talk to in a moment. But that's come from you. You told us that, and we've tried to help. Our previous series of training webinars received great feedback. 99% of respondents saying that they would recommend them to others, and 94% advising that their knowledge has increased as a result of the training. You'll hear more about these and our other capability building support as well later. We have also increased the support available through the Get Help Buying for Schools service, and have supported more than 1,000 schools and Academy trusts nationally. I've mentioned the new digital standards. This guidance and support can help you save time and money when buying, implementing, and using digital technology effectively. And we also hear from you that navigating the wide range of guidance services, data requests and communications from the department can be really challenging. We're therefore looking to streamline and personalise digital services to help improve user experience, free up workforce capacity and support staff wellbeing. So keep talking to us. We are here. You are not on your own. I'm going to hand you over to Pete now to talk a little bit more about capability. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. Good, if cold morning. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to you this morning about how we're supporting capability building of school and trust business professional staff. So I've got 2 slides with 4 initiatives, which I'll talk through before going on to a slide with where you can go to access more information, which will be shared. Before I dive into the detail, though, I'd just like to make 2 broad points. Firstly, to be clear what we mean when we say school business professional. It's an umbrella term for a range of roles, including, for instance, school business manager, finance manager, and increasingly chief financial officers and chief operating officers. Now, we recognise there are varied needs across those roles and indeed within them. So all of these initiatives are underpinned by evidence from our school business professional survey, the findings of which are published on gov.uk to look across roles and what professionals' needs are. And the second broad point to make is that our aim is to support capability building across the sector. We recognise the importance of school and trust business professional roles. You have huge responsibility. It's roughly, let's say, £60 billion of revenue funding in the system per annum. And it's hugely important that you have support and your colleagues have support to have opportunities to maintain and build on capability levels. So those are my broad points. To jump into the detail on this slide, 2 ways in which we're supporting. Firstly, as Tanya mentioned, as of October this year, we launched another round of free to attend school resource management training webinars. These are open to attend for all professionals between now and the end of March next year. This year's topics are the 6 modules that are highlighted on the slide, building on the feedback we received about training needs from last year's offer. Really pleased to see that across the past 3 years, we've had over 9,000 professionals attend at least one webinar, and we're hoping and seeing really high numbers for this year so far as well. We've really consciously covered a lot of the different functional areas. So, for instance, digital technology and infrastructure and strategic estate management, some of which have been introduced for the first time, recognising that the kind of breadth of responsibilities, in particular in Academy Trust central teams, are growing. The findings in the green boxes on the right-hand side just show some of the headline findings about how professionals felt about the webinars last year. So Tanya already mentioned the 99% recommendation figure, and 94% of respondents said their knowledge had increased because of the training. So we would really encourage yourselves and indeed your colleagues to attend the webinars that most meet your needs. Second initiative on this slide is that we about a year ago piloted foundation level contract management training, which was designed by the Cabinet Office to be used originally and indeed still is used by civil servants. And we wanted to see if the principles that are taught about in that contract management training would apply to the education sector. And the findings from the pilot with over 100 professionals going through this training have been really promising. Yes, some people have said an even better if would be more contextualization to the education sector, but to actually learn about some fundamental principles about contract management, this seems to be meeting professionals' needs. So we're going to continue to make this available to more professionals over the coming years. It comes with accreditation, which we know is great for professional recognition, and also is accessible online so people can go through it around busy schedules in time that most suits their needs. as I said, in a couple of slides time, I'll come on to where you can go for more information about each of these initiatives. Next slide, please. So 2 more initiatives on this slide, which are a lot more about kind of targeted investment in a deeper level for individuals. So firstly, we have been investing in targeted bursaries and piloting how much the qualifications that we're investing in meet professionals' needs. The first of those has been the Diploma in School Financial and Operational Leadership, which was co-designed by the Institute of School Business Leadership and the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accounting. And to date, we've supported 75 new or aspiring chief financial officers to work in the trust sector through a 75% funded bursary for that qualification. Findings have been really promising that qualification is preparing people well to improve in the CFO role, or if they're new in it, to meet their new responsibilities. And you can see some of the key headline findings in the green boxes on the slide. Therefore, really pleased to say a 75% funded bursary is something we're going to continue to offer, albeit on a targeted level where there is the most need. Secondly, we recognise that everybody's career pathway and trajectory doesn't necessarily involve aspiring to become a chief financial officer. So alongside that, we've launched a similar bursary scheme for school business leaders, many of whom will be working in, for instance, trust business manager roles, and that is the level 5 diploma for school business leaders, and that's still currently in the pilot phase, so we're evaluating the impact of that qualification now. Fourthly and finally, as Tanya alluded to at the start, we've also run a mentoring program pairing new or inexperienced professionals across the CFO, COO, finance director, and school business manager roles with experienced peers. And we've seen really positive findings around how much that's increased people's confidence, for instance, with working with other senior colleagues and leaders, and also helping them to think about further career progression. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. I apologize that each initiative has a slightly different link or email address to follow, but each of them are on this single slide, so you can take this away and follow up on the ones that you are most interested in. So school resource management webinars available to book from now. All of the modules are available at different times between now and the end of March next year. Secondly, contract management training. We need to see how much demand we get from this. So this one is a case of requesting a space by using the email address escc.project@education.gov.uk on the slide. Thirdly, for the bursaries, as I mentioned, both have been in pilot phase to make sure that they're meeting professionals' needs up until now. So we plan to publish details about criteria for those going forward shortly. And finally, mentoring. Really pleased to say this is something we're going to continue to fund and deliver as a new deployment type to the School Resource Management Advisor Programme. So as well as being able to access the traditional deployments, now there's an option to access and mentor through the programme to help based on individuals' agreed action plans. And I think my fourth and final slide just includes some findings about the mentoring and contract management program, which I didn't previously share on the slides, but I've spoken to briefly. So in brief, finding really positive findings from the mentoring about supporting people's confidence, which is great for us to see, given how much pressure and responsibility people in your roles have. And lastly, the contract management training, as you can see from the figures, from both of our first 2 pilot cohorts and meeting the vast majority of people's needs in terms of helping them to understand contract management training, which we know as Academy trusts grow, will grow in complexity. So that brings me to the end of my piece. I hope that's been interesting for you, and you indeed find across these initiatives something that will help to support your capability building.
Thanks ever so much, Pete. I realise you're going to be leaving us shortly. Just before we go on to Tom, we had a couple of questions which you might want to answer. The first one is, how do we access the bursary? Just to be clear how we do that.
Yes, so for now, we're still managing it through ESFA leads. So it will be a case of getting in touch with the ESFA and speaking about that kind of one-on-one individual level. As I said, our aspiration soon is to be transparent about the criteria for those and publish something on gov.uk. But for now, do get in touch with the ESFA if it's something you think would meet your needs.
Lovely, thank you. And there's quite a lot of talk about, and I think we've discussed this before a fair bit, why is the Level 7 SPB course not funded via the apprenticeship levy? Any comments on that one?
Any comments on that one? Why is it not funded? To fund through the apprenticeship levy, it needs to not have a. It's getting quite technical, but it's difficult to create a new standard to fund that through the levy route. There are some existing financial qualifications that can be funded through the apprenticeship levy, and as well as that bursary, we are working in the background to see how much they can be contextualized the education sector. So our aspiration is that if not now, and potentially one day in the future, there would be a financial education option through the levy, as well as the qualification here.
Lovely, thank you. I know it's quite complicated. It's something we've thought about in depth, yeah. And so we are trying to work that one through. But in the meantime, we have an offer here, which we hope will help support you. We've also got just a techie question here about how many hours are involved in study for the diploma?
The diploma, that is a year-long course. I don't have a average time throughout that course figure to mind, but we can share the course brochure with attendees, which will include that information, I'm fairly sure, but it's a year long.
Okay, and we will, just to be clear, we will share the slides with everyone, so you've got the various links, so you don't need to worry about that. And then final one from me, when will the next round of grades at Level 7 bursaries be launched?
So that will be from around about February next year. So if it's something that is of interest, I do suggest you reach out to or get in contact via the ESFA very shortly.
Okay, lovely. Pete, thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Really great that this work is continuing and growing because we all view it as a really important part of the SRM portfolio. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, I know we've all been waiting for this. Thomas, this is your moment of glory. Tom Goldman, Funding Policy Unit, over to you.
Thanks so much, Tanya. And the first thing I will say is let's move on to the next slide so we don't have to look at that rather elderly photo of me anymore. Thanks so much. I've got about 20 minutes. I'm going to quite rattle through the slides I have here. I've been keeping an eye on the Q&A. I'll be trying to pick up some of the things there, in particular, some of the questions around special educational needs, which I know is a very large concern for many people at the moment as we go through, although I also think we'll probably want to pick those up in the panel session at the end. I've been introduced, Tom Goldman. I'm in charge of the Funding Policy Unit here at DFE. Quickly to say that I'm going to be talking about revenue and not capital funding today, and I'm going to be talking about schools 5 to 16 and mostly mainstream schools funding 5 to 16 today. They're obviously early years, post-16 funding and special schools, all very important, but not my focus today. And the rest of the slide just kind of runs through what I shall rattle through in the next 20 minutes or so. So let's go on to the next slide. Starting here with the national budget. On the left, you can see the total size of the core schools budget. That's slightly a term of art, and which is why we've put it in inverted commas. It covers all the funding that is being provided by the government for the, if you like, the core running costs in relation to 5 to 16 education in schools in England, and that is both mainstream schools and special schools. It includes all our high needs funding, as I'll go into in a second. And as you can see, that has risen quite considerably in cash terms over the last couple of years, of extra £4 billion in 22-23, followed by another £3.9 billion into the current financial year. Obviously, that balances against some very high inflation that we've had over the last couple of years. Certainly worth noting that the increase, the cash increase into next year, 1.8 billion. Obviously, that's still a cash increase. It's about another 3%. That is a smaller year-on-year increase than we've seen in the last couple of years. Obviously, that is, we all hope, to be accompanied by a significantly lower rate of inflation next year that we'll be seeing as well. But the sort of cash increases that have been available the last couple of years, not available in the year coming. And on the right-hand side of this slide, I've just set out the most significant elements of how that is split. Unsurprisingly, the great majority
Right. I'm not sure if that is Tom or my internet. I think it's probably Tom. Sorry, Tom, we lost you there, but we'll bring you back.
No, apologies. DFE's system is not perhaps all it quite could be on this. As I was saying, the great majority of the funding goes to mainstream schools, including in this year and in one part next, with a couple of additional grants in relation to some money. I shall go into those in a little bit more detail later on. The other most significant element of our overall funding is, of course, funding for high needs. That is funding for special schools and also funding for the top-up funding for children with EHCPs in mainstream schools. That has been rising very quickly over the last few years, as we all know, so has the costs and pressures associated with special educational needs been arising very quickly. We're very conscious at which those pressures have been rising. That's one of the reasons why by next year there'll have been a 60% increase in the funding there since 1920. But we're also conscious that that's still not providing, not matching the expenditure that local authorities are making from their high needs block, and that there are still substantial pressures on mainstream schools' own funding to provide the first £6,000 of support for children with high needs. And there is a very substantial programme of work across DFE, ESFA, with colleagues across government and local government and schools, all looking at what we can do to ensure that we can give the best and the right support for these children, but in a way that is far more financially sustainable in future. Let's have the next slide. Thank you very much. That was a quick run on the total funding available nationally. Then we have to distribute that around the country. As I'm sure most on the call will know, we have a two-tier system for doing that, a national funding formula which determines how much funding will go into each local authority area, and then each local authority setting a local funding formula which determines the individual budgets of mainstream schools both maintained and academy schools there. And on this slide, I've just noted some of the main changes that are going ahead between 24-25 over where we are at the moment. In the national formula, we're not changing which factors we look at to see where the pressures are rising. We are improving our approach on how much money goes to schools with split sites. And when I say improving, that's because to date we've not had a national formula on that. We've simply accepted whatever is done locally, and we are moving, following consultation, to a system where that will now be the same across the country. So schools will qualify or not for split sites funding on the same rules wherever they are. There is a 1.4% cash increase in all the factor values with the national funding formula, and then having done that, we are also rolling the mainstream schools additional grant which was provided in the current year into the NFF. So it will be that money which originally arose from the 2022 autumn statement. That money will be rolled into the NFF starting from next year. On the local funding formulae, it's now the rule that all local authorities must use the same factors that the national funding formula does, and that they must move the values that they attach to those factors at least 10% closer to the NFF values. So this is a rather slow process. I'll go in a bit more detail later, of moving towards a fully nationally consistent picture. Once a local authority has got within 2.5% of the NFF, we say they are mirroring, and then no further action is needed at this time. The minimum funding guarantee, which is the smallest year-on-year per pupil increase a school can see, is set by each local authority between +0 or +0.5%. And in terms of where local authorities are with their formula, 106 this year are already getting into that mirroring of the national funding formula that I mentioned before. So the NFF is in large parts of the country what is driving individual schools' budgets, although that is not yet uniform in all parts of the country. Thanks very much. I'll have the next slide. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. I've included it really so that it will be in people's packs. It includes a link to the where you can get the full details of how the national funding formula works. And there is a nice graphic of the elements that are within it. As I say, not going to pause on this one. Let's go on to the next slide, where, having talked about the distribution of funding, I said I would talk in a bit more detail about some of those specific grants. And I recognise, and it's been mentioned in the chat, that there have been a number of new grants coming in and quite late in the day, and I know there's been a particular question about pensions. And it's true, it's never our favourite thing to add an additional grant late in the day, but obviously nor would we ever turn down getting extra money and providing it to schools whenever the opportunity arises. So the Mainstream Schools Additional Grant, which was introduced following additional funding that came in the 2022 autumn statement, that was too late to incorporate it into the NFF at that point. We paid that out in the current year, but we are incorporating it into the NFF from this April. There's also a Teachers Pay Additional Grant, and people may be saying MSAG and TPAG are not the most snazzy names. That wouldn't be wrong. That is certainly not the top of the funding policy unit skill set. The Teachers Pay Additional Grant, that was introduced following the pay award that was made last summer. Again, obviously too late then to incorporate it into the 23-24 NFF, and sadly also too late to incorporate it in 24-25 NFF. So that again will be paid out as a separate grant in the current year, and next year we will then incorporate it into the NFF from April 2025. The 23-24 rates people should already be well aware of. Apologies, that should read obviously the 24-25 rates will be scaled up from the 23-24 rates so that they cover a full year and not 7 months. Question in the chat about pensions contributions. There will be a further grant. Again, it has to be separate from the NFF in its first year to match the costs of the 5 percentage point increase in teachers' pensions contributions that will come in from April. We will be announcing the rates of that as soon as we can. We still just have some final discussions to have with Treasury before we can go ahead with that, but we'll get that out as soon as we can. As I say, it is based on meeting the cost of that 5% increase in teacher pension contributions rates, and again we will incorporate it into the NFF from April 2025. In all cases, obviously we're very aware that the national funding formula increases arrive with an academy from September, not April, and therefore each time when we roll a funding stream like this into the NFF, there is a continuing 5 months of support specifically for academies to ensure that there isn't a gap from April to September in their funding. The other big specific grant that was in my slide earlier is the pupil premium. There are no plans at the moment, certainly, to roll that into the NFF. And again, the 24-25 rates will be announced in December as per our normal timetable. Okay, thanks. Let's go on to the next slide. So that was all about money coming in. Obviously, the vital thing is the balancing of the money coming out and the costs that schools face. Some things to say about this year. So each year the department publishes a schools costs technical note. Again, you'll have a link there when the slides come round. That's the one we published at the beginning of this year. And we do that alongside the department's evidence that goes to the school teacher review body about what the forthcoming teacher pay award should be, because how much money there is and how much what the costs that schools are facing is
Hello, colleagues. We'll just wait for Tom to stop buffering. I'm sure. There we go. He's back.
I'm back again. I am very sorry. I don't know why this is happening. As I was saying, our school costs considerations look at what has happened on teacher pay. They look at what's happening on support staff pay as well, where we look to the National Joint Council, which sets local government pay increases as our guide for what is happening on support staff across the board. Obviously, not every school is bound by that, but it's the best. But some schools are, and it's the best guide we think we have for what is needed across the board. So we pay close attention to that, and including taking account of the fact that that has been decisions on that have been flat cash increases for all local government staff recently, and that has obviously as a percentage terms is more generous for those at the lower end of those pay scales. So those are taken into account as well. In the last couple of years, we started to look very carefully, obviously, at energy costs. That's quite complicated, not only in knowing what energy prices people are paying and where that might go in the future, but obviously trying to think about the fact that many schools, as many people, will have a fixed energy contract for some time, and then when their energy bills will actually change depends on the timing of those contracts and when they cease and when people move either to a new fixed contract or a variable contract. So a very complicated and part of our calculations there, but we are seeking to take energy costs specifically into account. And then obviously we look at non-pay costs for the rest across the rest of the board as well. Now, is that school's technical note and the calculations we did for that, which underpinned the decision to introduce the teacher pay additional grant from the September just passed. That was based on the 3.5% teacher pay award we thought would be affordable after taking account of all those costs in our evidence to the STRB and through that technical note, and then the difference between the 6.5% award there was and that 3.5% affordable figure is the basis on which that pay grant was calculated. I would love to be able to tell you what the answers for 2024 are going to be, but obviously we do not know. We anticipate a similar timetable to the one we saw this year. So our note and evidence to the STRB probably very early in the year. There are hopes that the actual award may be able to be done a little bit faster than in recent years, but I think there are no guarantees on that. We'll be keeping, again, a very close eye on what's happening on support staff pay. Last year, the first offer on that was made in February. So again, that timetable is not set in stone, but we will be looking out for that and taking it into account, and obviously looking to how energy and other costs are shaping up as that year progresses. Thanks so much. Next slide. This is where, if that was or not as clear or definitive on future costs as I'd like to be, sadly I can not be definitive on future funding beyond the coming year either. You'll be aware the last spending review and then the subsequent additions at the autumn statement and through the teachers' pay grant have provided us with budgets through to the coming financial year. We do not yet have a set timetable for when the next spending review will occur, nor do we know which years it will cover. So it might be a 1-year spending review. We've had a few of those recently. It might be another 3-year spending review, as the last one was. Obviously, the department will be part of that, and as soon as we have that outcome, we will be letting people know. But until we know what the outcome is and which year it covers, we can't. There's nothing further that we can tell people about what the outcome will be. The timetable, I think, is probably a little less clear than it might be in other circumstances, because obviously there is a general election coming up. There'll either be a spending review before a general election, or a spending review after a general election, or possibly, if there's a change of government, there could be both, of course. So that is a further complicating factor as we try to work out how the timetable might play out. And in terms of the outcome, I no more know that than you do. I've noted here the Prime Minister's speech at the Conservative Party conference last month, I think it was. His main funding priority in every spending review from now on will be education. That is obviously something this department will be looking to make sure is true. Whereas we have those debates about the spending review, we'll be looking at those pressures that you've been eloquently speaking about on all schools, and as I say, particularly about those pressures, I think, on the high needs, special educational needs, which seem to be the very most acute to us at the moment. But as ever, all spending reviews are about the balancing of priorities across the whole of the public sector. So again, as I say, I do not know how they will turn out, but as we do, we will be providing as much information to you as we can and as early as we can. I think that's the end of my slides, and I think it's 11 o'clock, which I'll hand back to Tanya. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Lots of questions in the chat. There will be an opportunity to ask Tom some further questions, and we'll continue to answer them as quickly as we can. We're going to have a 10-minute break now. When we return, we've got a session with Paul Rickard from Durham and Newcastle Diocesan Learning Trust, who's going to talk to us about their journey of falling roles and the benefits of rural schools being part of a trust. You'll be able to ask any questions of Paul after his presentation, and then we'll move into the panel. So have a quick 10 minutes. We'll be back at 11:10 promptly. Enjoy, and hopefully you can get a nice warm cup of tea, which is exactly what I'm going to do because it is a bit cold today. All right, see you at the other side. Bye-bye. Okay, welcome back, colleagues. Hope you had a good short break. I'm now delighted to welcome Paul Ricard, who's taking some time out of his busy schedule to talk to us about reflections from his trust on their journey regarding falling roles and the benefits of rural schools being part of a trust. So first of all, thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone's going to find this a fascinating session. So over to you.
Thank you. I'm smiling at some of the comments that are coming through there from colleagues, and I'm not sure I can answer most of those, but I'll certainly say I share your pain. So yeah, I am Paul Ricard. I'm CEO of the Durham and Newcastle Dawson Learning Trust based up in the northeast of England. I used to be, prior to this role, Dawson Director of Education for the Diocese of Durham and Newcastle. So I used to look after 106 schools of varying sizes and degree in the northeast. So interest now, I've moved across the trust full time, which is an experience in itself, so I'm sure you can all identify with. If I have the next slide, please. So our trust is made up of many schools. At this moment in time, we have 17 schools in total, and we are together yet distinct is how we describe ourselves. All of our schools are unique, even those which are really close together have something different to offer, and that's really important to us as a trust. We don't want clones. We want people to have their own identity, and working particularly in rural schools only a mile or so apart, which in itself causes as many issues as much to celebrate, it's so important that they are their own unique being. But gradually over time, I'll be lying if I didn't say we're starting to see some things coming together in terms of how we work to make sure that these schools can stay open and remain affordable to us as we move forward in challenging times. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we're a growing trust, 17 primary schools, soon to be 20. Smallest one, 52 children, including the nursery, largest 320. Currently growing a rural cluster, which means some of those joining us will actually add to a cluster we have in Northumberland. And we cover 7 local authorities, soon to be 8 local authorities. But we do have the issue of falling roles. And over the next 12 months, possibly 2 years, we think we could lose anything between 100 children to 190 children, which is a huge gap and a huge issue, as you can imagine, for us in the northeast. And that's not just our tiny and rural schools, that's also our largest schools. So one of our schools with a PAN of 90 this year only took in 60 children, and we didn't actually find that out from the local authority in as timely manner as we hoped. So you can imagine that was quite complicated to manage, and will even more become a bigger problem as we move forwards with funding, etc. Interesting, we will have hopefully 3 schools join us, but because 2 of those are less than 100, it doesn't necessarily bring in lots of funding with them either. Our hope is one of them will be a full single form-entry primary school, but you can probably tell from where I'm sitting that that's quite large to us as a trust. I always smile at the definition of a small school. In my old job, I used to be responsible for the school on Holy Island, which had 2 children. I'd like to think we sometimes need to redefine what we think small is, as being around about the 50 to 60 mark and below, particularly when you're talking about mixed age classes, etc. Can we move to the next slide, please? As a trust, we work really hard to service all of our schools. And part of this offer now is really being driven by this falling pupil roll. As we see numbers start to drop, everyone's starting to feel the pressure, and it gets difficult. No one can deny that's the case. I think our key things out of our central services, which are really important to our schools to help them at this point, really our school improvement offer is bespoke to our schools, but a minimum of 6 days of someone working with head teachers to improve their schools. And that's not about telling people what to do, it's rolling their sleeves up and doing it with them. I think headship is an incredibly lonely job when you can see the budget starting to dwindle as a result of children not being in the school. So it's important that we as a trust hold the hands of our heads. And I'd like to think at times we try and use the central service team to wrap our arms around our schools to help them as they move forwards. We've also switched now to monthly finance visits. We feel it's really important to be on top of the money on a monthly basis. This has been a shift for us. We never used to do that. We used to do it every term, but now we feel actually we need to be in there every month, checking the checks and balances, making sure there's nothing that's running away from us, and also keeping an eye on those numbers of children. Are they increasing or decreasing? Mainly decreasing, but on some occasions in our rural schools, one family can move into the area or out to the area, and that can have a significant impact. We've really invested in our mental health as a trust in terms of looking after our schools' mental health, in terms of not just our children, but our staff. These are hard times. It's lonely, as I've said, so I think it's been important for us to focus on that. And part of that for us is our regular catch up with our head teachers and our business managers, as we feel are at the cutting edge of decisions at this moment in time and what's happening in those schools. And those networks are usually about funding in terms of what's going to happen next. And I wish I knew, interested in the last slides from Tom there about how far we can predict when we're trying to do our 3-year budget planning. But we have to be agile. And I think that's one of the things that I would say is an absolute strength of our tiny schools. They are incredibly agile. And I think sometimes some of our larger schools look onto that and think, wow, how in the world can they do what they do with so little? But actually, there's a lot we can learn from that. You can see the other services we offer. We offer those at a top slice of 6%. That's, again, a challenge for schools, but 6% of a tiny budget is a tiny amount in. So the money has to work harder and go further. Next slide, please. Affordability. We can't cut anymore. I was a head teacher 9 years ago, and I was saying at that point, we can't cut anymore. And do the schools in our trust have to support our smaller schools in situations like this? Well, yes, they do, in terms of the top slice that we offer and the top slice that we have to adjust accordingly. But what we do is we do offer an overdraft where we can to our schools, and we're in a fortunate position to have some reserve. It's not huge, which means we can almost smooth out sometimes the falling rolls, but inevitably that can't go on forever. We do share leadership. We try and share leadership as much as we can. But what we've learned is that it's not just as simple as saying we'll just share a head teacher. It also means if we're going to share a head and they're a teaching head, who backfills the class? It means what do we do for the next tier down if that head's not well or that head has a planned absence? Who steps in? How does that work? So for us, it's a long conversation about actually, is this going to work for this school? Is it going to work for this cluster or group of schools? How close are they in reality? Subject leadership is an interesting one because I come at this from the hat of Ofsted as well as being a CEO. And whilst I don't inspect, I'm being inspected quite recently in many of our schools. And it's really difficult, isn't it, in a small school to manage how you actually get through subject leadership deep dives. So for us, something that we've looked to do as the numbers go down is do we have specialists in our larger schools that support our smaller schools, not to be the people who run the deep dives, but to be the people who actually help or sit in with to support when there's not a specialism in that place. We also use support staff in an agile way as much as we can, shared across our schools. Does the buying power of the trust help? Yes, it does, but being candid, local authorities are trying really hard as well with this. And there are still services that we work with the local authorities. And I think for us, one of our real kind of things we've had to work on is that relationship as maintained schools and academies suffer the problem of falling roles. And at the bottom, you'll see how do we keep the schools a real first choice for parents? I think that comes down from being honest. And I think that comes down to making sure that people and parents see that our schools are family schools and they are personal to that area. And again, I said at the beginning, we're not about clones in our trust. We want our schools to be unique to their community. Next slide, please. So our key vulnerabilities as a trust for us over the last year or so when moving forwards, affordability of tiny schools, but being completely honest, I wouldn't be without them. We have to work so hard to keep our tiny schools running, but it's important to us that they are there. They give us so much. And our schools, which are larger, are now starting to learn, as I said, from them about what do we do to continue to teach a broad and balanced curriculum. How do we support mixed age classes? In my larger school, where we have 3 forms of entry, as it staggers down, we're going to have mixed classes. Our tiny schools are experts at this in terms of how to manage a mixed class, but that requires specialist support, it requires backfill, it requires a real network of opportunity for people to listen to each other. We're managing staff and managing restructures, and how do we keep those key staff? That's a real challenge, not going to lie to you, and sometimes we have lost some of our best staff because we've had to restructure. And I don't want this to be a gloomy presentation, I hope it's not, but it's really important that we get that right. Talked about teaching heads, CPD in tiny and rural, it's a challenge, but we're fine, we have to take it to the schools. We can't expect people to be out all of the time from school anymore, and technology's really helped with this in terms of our networks. Buildings fit for purpose, really important for us, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. And how do we keep parents and carers on board with change? Yeah, it's again, as soon as you're in a school and here, or there might be a mixed class, that year group, I'm sure lots of you have had the communication of, well, which class is my child going to be in? Does that mean they effectively repeat a year? So communication is really important. Next slide, please. Curriculum and mixed age classes, staffing the model. It isn't anything new, to be honest, in the northeast of England, and it's something we continue to grapple with. And I think over time, our school improvement team have had to work really hard to find those pockets of best practice and then disseminate those across all of our schools now, not just our small schools. We've had some hard choices to make about nursery provision. Yes, we need to guarantee a through flow of children, but actually, is the pull of funding for that too great? Does that mean we can continue to operate those nurseries? Does it mean we need a signpost where we've got a cluster of schools together to have one nursery feeding many schools? Leading many subject areas, as we have a fall in specialists, how do we do that? Our networks have become really important to us. Not going to lie, it's still in its infancy. It's still something that we're working on. And who answers the door if we're looking at cutting out the staff who sit in the office? Safeguarding issues are plenty as soon as someone's not there to answer the phone. Executive leaders are hard to find, a bit like secondary physics teachers, aren't they, at the moment, like hen's teeth. So we have now started to look at growing our own. So how can we work with ICT services to make sure that we have people who are ready to work in the schools we need them to with mixed year groups? A rolling curriculum sounds great. Just make sure an Ofsted inspector knows what that actually means and how that actually works. And have we as a team done our checks and balances to make sure that the quality of education is still as good as it could be? How do we keep our best staff? Ask me in a couple of years how we managed to retain them. I really hope we do. I think we really look after our staff, and I think now more than ever, there's a need to do that. There's all sorts of gimmicks that people have, but actually I think workload is the biggest key to that. And we've stripped out as much as we possibly can of workload, and we continue to do that whilst making sure that delivery of education is as good as it can be. Next slide, please. I'll focus a bit on the tiny and rural because I guess that's what we have a lot of. It's really important to us that they aren't just annexes of our bigger schools. They have so much to offer us. Teaching heads who currently work 2.5 days a week, when I really wish there could be 2. We accept and we know that we have a different role in smaller schools. And I think that's something that we have to work hard on as a team to make sure that sometimes they get more of our time because they have a greater need. Delegation is important in all of our schools, but we can't delegate as much as maybe sometimes we'd like to because they're doing so much already. But I keep coming back to our smaller schools have so much to offer us. Trust networks, trust staff need to be mindful of the audience. Keep thinking about the fact that it's a challenge to work in schools at the moment. So my central team are always asked really what is the impact of what you're going to say? What's the unintended consequence? And with regards to CPD, a shameless plug, MPQ Small has been huge for us on the CV network, on the job training, fully funded through a grant. It's really been useful for us. Next slide, please. Buildings. We've spent a lot of time looking at our buildings over the last 12 months, and it's a key priority for us moving forwards. We have partnered with an external estates management team. It's something that really is important in terms of, is the space usable? A lot of our schools now, we're going to have to adapt, and that's where we really need to know what we get for our SCAR funding, hopefully soon, as we've gone over that 3,000 mark. But again, even with SIF, I think some of that money is going to have to be directed to how we have to change our buildings to make them fit for purpose. We've had to invest in our ICT. I never thought I'd see the day I was putting a Starlink up in one of the schools, not personally, but on the outside, to make sure we had real connectivity. And estates management have had to take a lot of the strain. I had teachers are not there to clean the gutters and flush the drains, although been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. We now try and put into our schools comprehensive support to make sure there's a rolling programme of what's going on, and that is that regular maintenance cycle, perhaps where there hasn't been before, but a challenge if your caretaker is 60 years plus and doesn't like going up the ladders. Resilience and contingency, I only put that in because out in our rural schools, some of our children get delivered on quad bikes, and I often wonder, could we make more of quad bikes? But when I've got that answer, I'll come back to you. Next slide, please. And I promise I'm nearly at the end. Communication, I'll put this in because I think for us, we really have to be honest about where we are. We have to be the first to share the news. Again, coming back to tiny and rural, once one person knows, everyone knows what's going on in the school. These schools are at the centre of the community, as every school is. But what does that mean if you're at risk? It's amazing how many parents and friends and community come out to support a school when they realise that we're struggling. Websites have been important for us, not just for Ofsted, but how we sell our schools and how we promote them. And internal communication for us has had to be so clear as well. We want our staff to know that there is a challenge, and that's not to unsettle them, but just to make people think about how we move forwards in a meaningful way, making sure our quality of education is as good as it can be. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Hopefully that was useful, and happy to take questions. Can't guarantee I'll know the answers.
Thanks ever so much, Paul. That's always fascinating to hear the journey you've been on over the last few months and years. And thank you very much for your honesty as well. Before you started, you said to me, you probably are not going to get any questions, but actually that's far from the truth. So I'm afraid I have got some questions for you, and I hope you don't mind if I put them to you now. So the first question is around budget setting. So how are you finding your 3-year budget dealing with such small schools? Any advice to give to colleagues?
Am I allowed to give the honest answer, EFSA colleagues?
Absolutely.
Terrifying, if I'm being completely candid. We have, as you'll see, our fair share of tiny and rural schools. And you can imagine we had a situation this week where 4 children came back to one of our schools as they'd moved between a 2-tier and 3-tier structure. And the parents weren't happy, but they moved out during census and moved back after. So we've in effect lost that funding for that group of children, and they won't be with us very long, so we'll probably never capture that funding again. And that's just an example of how hard and difficult it is for us, so that we feel that it's a challenge to manage that in an agile way. And as I said earlier, our heads are brilliant in terms of trying to manage these things. But that for us is where we need our business partners, as we call them out from the trust, every month, updating and reforecasting. We don't change the budget, we reforecast. And we find that's a really interesting way of trying to keep a handle on things. But I'll be lying if I don't have sleepless nights. Our accounts have just been audited, so we know our numbers are right. And yeah, the challenge continues. My CFO's next door. I'm surprised she's not on listening, sending me messages. But I'll leave a lot of that to her to work with me on, but it's not easy.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your honesty. So there's quite a few questions both before your presentation and in the chat, and certainly something I picked up at the beginning about not having the time for capability building across your trust. And you've mentioned this a little bit as well. Do you want to just draw on this? What's your answer to the I really don't have time for any capability building?
I think for us, that's where bringing our heads together regularly is really useful for us, because for us, it's about almost carving out that time that is needed to make sure there is that tomorrow. I think we have to really protect head teachers' time to be head teachers. And I think for us, we've really pushed hard to make sure that we build into the budget that ability to have that time to discuss and to kind of make those plans. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that moving forwards, we have to look at shared leadership, but what we want to do is do that over time. So it's how we smooth that out really as we move forwards. So I don't think I'm being very clear on that, but it's difficult.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. We've got another individual who's got a very similar math structure to you with 21 primaries over 3 LAs. How have you merged your LGPS pension scheme, because they're looking to do this now? So any advice you could give this particular colleague?
We haven't merged, so they are all separate, which you can imagine brings its challenges, but those challenges are managed by the central team. We operate over one payroll system deliberately, which are really good for us. But we've kept those separate because we've had to, because we felt the complexities of that would be too much.
What was your thinking through that process then, Paul? I mean, you talk about the complexity. Do you want to just unpick that a little bit?
I think pensions in themselves are complicated, to be honest. It's something that's on our list of is this something that would work better for us in terms of contributions, etc. But it's one of those things where we are a small team as well as covering so many trust schools. And I think for us at this moment in time, it's not been something that we've been encouraged to do through SRMA or anything else. So from our perspective, we feel as we continue to grow, it's a bit like job evaluation. You can imagine over Senate and local authorities, 7 different pay structures, different bandings and everything else. At some point, we'll have to do that. But interesting that from our perspective, it would be a really costly exercise, but also it's a really complicated exercise. And while we're still in that growth phase, which being candid, I think will start to slow down now for us. And we feel they're the kind of things that we need to do probably in a year or two's time.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. There's a few sort of quite technical questions. Leadership structure in a 52 pupil school. Do you want to give a sense for what that looks like?
Yeah, so in terms of leadership for that school, it is 1 head teacher. There is a business manager in there working with that head teacher, and then it goes down to teaching staff, and that's where there's a heavy reliance from us to support that school at all levels. So they get more challenge and support days, mainly more support than challenge to manage that curriculum. And we also buy in other services to help that school. But again, it is really, really complicated and really difficult. And a lot of these are part-time staff as well, to manage roles in different ways. It's that dynamic kind of leadership. We made a promise to our schools that as long as we can keep a head teacher in every school, we will. That's really important. That's getting harder every year to do that. But that's one of the things about our trust, which we really want to try and protect. But they are teaching heads, and interesting, our last SRMA was that about teaching heads can't do more than 2 days. Our teaching heads are doing more than that in terms of teaching, but it's something that's on our risk register, is something that we really need to work hard to see if we manage that differently.
Thank you for that. There's another question here. We have 3 schools with an OR of less than 50. Is there a number below which you think a school is unviable?
Oh, wow. If I can flip that question in its head, in my previous position, I had to recommend closure of schools with the local authority, and it's not something I would ever rush to do again. I bear the scars of closure of schools. There are trusts in this area who operate really tiny schools of 20 children, and we learn from them an awful lot, and I would say are still very successful. School closure for us would be a failure, I think, if I'm being honest. That said, I do think there is a need to look at how do we do this in the future, where we have schools that are so closely together. So again, an example for us is, like you, we have schools where there are other schools within 1.6, 1.7 miles. And one's a local authority school, one's an academy. The local authority aren't going to close their school. We don't want to close ours. How do you almost not bash their heads together, but does someone else not step in at that point to say, actually, there must be a better way? of managing this moving forwards. And I think that that's where in maintained schools, it's the local authority, isn't it? And academies, it's the CEO and the team and the trust board. But I do think at times there almost needs to be some form of mediation about how do we manage these tiny and rural schools. But I certainly won't want to close one. I think it's more about how do they work more closely together.
Okay, yeah, thank you. We've got another one here. Do the loans your trust provides to the tiny rural schools to support the deficit budgets actually go through accounts as a physical payment? And what are the terms for repayment?
So I'll be completely candid. I'll have to ask my CFO how we do it. We almost operate a kind of overdraft. There is no interest, but there has to be. The trust board will only agree it if we can see recovery within 3 to 5 years. And that's really important for us. So it is about that plan and moving forwards. And that is about that, like I've said, that smoothing, because a knee-jerk reaction in a tiny and rural school, one family in, one family out, that's the difference, isn't it, in terms of how you do that. But that's where I think it's, and again, I say this being careful, that's why we need a little bit of a reserve and allowed to keep a little bit of a reserve to allow us to be able to do these things when we have tiny and rural schools, because they will sometimes bounce back. It's when we're not seeing a bounce back in 3 to 5 years that we have to look at that more carefully to say, actually, are we at breaking point?
Thank you. We might touch on reserves actually at the panel session afterwards as well, because I think that's quite an important point. Andrew Robinson talks about one of the biggest problems for small schools is suppliers who price their products on a per school basis. Just makes things unaffordable. We need suppliers to sell to us as a trust rather than an individual school. Have you got any experiences of that?
Yeah, we played the violins, and we beg and we really drive hard for that for our tiny and rural schools. And we're looking at ways of as I guess if you say, trying to avoid where it's a per school purchase and pushing it through the trust to again try and smooth that out a bit. But you're absolutely right. There are some suppliers who are belligerent and will just say no. But I have to be honest, that's why we're starting to say to them, well, we'll look at other opportunities. But in a rural context, again, that becomes a challenge, because who wants to go as far as Northumberland or out into the western between Cumbria and Newcastle? It's difficult. So no, I share your pain on that. But we really push hard to say this is going to be an element of fairness if you wish to work in all of our schools. And I've got to be honest, I do. With things like that, I do push back. I'm lucky I'm part of the Church of England in that sense, I would say. We push back to the wider group to say, can they bargain for us in that sense? Can they push harder? We do bind a contract to try and smooth that as well, with bigger local authorities, not just those which are close to us, and to try and drive that cost down.
Okay, lovely. I've got more questions than I'm going to be able to deal with, so I'll try and bring a few together for you. A little bit around recruitment of staff and retention. You touched on that there. Have you got any tactics about how to make this as efficient, as easy as possible for your trust that you'd like to share with colleagues?
I think for retention, it's from my perspective, taking the time to spend it in schools, which can mean very late nights sometimes doing the rest of the job. But I think as a CEO, I have a responsibility to be seen by our staff. And I think that's important to our staff to not think that as a trust in particular, we are a distant body. I think having our team visible is really important, so that staff who work for us know that they can grab us in the corridor, make an honest comment. I really push hard to say that you can ask whatever you want to and I won't be offended. Sometimes I can't answer, but I try. In terms of recruitment, that's where the growing our own's coming in the fore. And I am taking an ad in a newspaper before Christmas for ITT in tiny and rural schools. And we are selling the fact that, come and work as part of a family, because that's important for us, that they have such a unique way of working, but still giving a brilliant quality of education. And I think we need to celebrate that. I love walking into our tiny schools as much as I do love walking into our biggest school. It's just different. But I think that's where the staff need to feel valued, and keeping a hold of staff, particularly as we go through the falling roles. One communication for our schools is that we need to look internally if there are posts coming up. Is this about redeployment? We don't move people around in our schools. we have an agreement in place whereby we'll only move a member of staff in the trust if the member of staff agrees, the head agrees, and the receiving head agrees to that person going on the move. That this is done in absolute collaboration. I wouldn't like to be told tomorrow I've got to work as a CEO in Middlesbrough. Not just, I don't have anything against Middlesbrough, I'd rather that than Sunderland, but in terms of where we are, I wouldn't want to do that to anyone else. I don't think that's right. And I know some colleagues would disagree, but that's my preference.
Thank you very much. Almost the last one. Have you considered reserves and or gag pooling?
I think that's one from our CFO. We talked about pooling, but at the moment, again, as I was saying, as we're growing, I'm not sure that's the right way to go. I have friends and colleagues who've done that and then changed their minds. So that's one thing. What we are doing is we are out to consultation across our trust about pooling DFC. And we're looking at that because some trusts in the North East are pooling DFC to manage their IT. We would like to almost pool it to think about a bit of a, dare I say, it's almost a second insurance for those disasters in schools, which are more than the DFC pot, but collectively could help a school out in the event of a state's management problem. Like everyone else on this, we have our issues. We're lucky we didn't have RAC, but our estates management team tell us the next big thing is going to be corrosion of pipes in heating systems, where they've been topped up with leaks with fresh water, which erodes them. And having just had to put new pipes into a school, it cost us £150,000 with no funding. We need to find a mechanism by which we can plug those gaps in the future. I don't want to end on a depressing one like that, though.
Okay. Are your faith schools?
Yeah, well, I've got to be really careful to answer that, because as a DGA, I used to say we're not faith schools, we're church schools. So we are, I guess you could argue we are faith schools, but as the Church of England, we don't have the faith-based criteria on our admissions policies. I'm sure across all of our trust schools now, that's been taken out, because as Church of England schools, we were based originally for the poor and for the community which they serve. And that actually, if you go back to the start of my presentation, was the driver behind all of our schools being unique. It was Joshua Watson who opened the first Church of England school, and it was about serving that community. And that for us is the key. Even where our schools are a mile or 2 miles apart, they've got to be unique, they've got to be individual. We are open, though, just to say we are open to non-church schools joining us. And we have had a couple of inquiries recently because they like the model. So, but yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And my final question, you'd be really pleased to know, is you talked about SRMAs. I mean, just very briefly, can you give us an idea of what your experiences were?
We've had two, and broadly, I would say they have been positive for us. They have highlighted things. I find an over-reliance sometimes on the numbers of children to how many staff you should have. And I think that should be used really carefully, particularly in tiny schools. I don't think it's that simple and that cut and dried. I know we try for a percentage of our upper 70s in terms of 79% of staffing costs. The reality is different at the moment, and that is driving our decisions over the next 12 months as we have falling pupil roles. So we currently have one. I think we've got 3 days left to run, and it not going to lie, it's been a challenge. It's made us kind of look in the mirror a bit harder about what we do and how we do it, and also challenged quite a lot the way we work as a trust, because I keep saying our trust is about we push down as many decisions as we can to local academy councils, local governing bodies within our schools, because we don't want to be the trust that does things to people. But that becomes more challenging when the money becomes tighter about that autonomy. Autonomy is an interesting word, isn't it? Because we really want our schools to be able to be what they want to be, but we've got to manage that carefully, and that I think is where SRMA is pushing us. But overall, positive experience. Okay,
lovely. So I just want to echo some comments in the chat now. Please don't be careful, it says. We need to be honest. And I think that has come through in spades in what you've said today, and your experiences have certainly been useful for colleagues. I can see that coming on the chat. And I probably can't say it any better than one of our anonymous colleagues who's saying, just wanted to say what an invaluable presentation by Paul. Very interesting from someone in there with their sleeves rolled up, balancing those budgets. So on behalf of everyone in the room, thank you very much. I know you've been willing to share your email address. You might regret that afterwards because we got over 500 people online. But I'm really, really grateful for the time you've taken today, your honesty, your candor. And it's only by being honest and candid that we can share each other's experiences and deal with all the very many challenges that we face at the moment. So thank you again, Paul. And I hope you keep warm up in the northeast.
It's tropical. We're in the shorts up here tonight. We'll be fine. The snow's just starting to lie. Don't worry about it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much, colleagues, for all those brilliant questions. We're now going to move into a Q&A session with our panel members who I introduced earlier on. I'm not sure what you can actually see, if I'm honest with you. I'm admitting my lack of experience on Teams Live on the number of windows we can open. So we might need to move around a little bit if you can only see me when I'm talking to the panel member talking. So bear with us a little bit on the IT. I thought I might just start with a question for Kevin, actually, who is the Deputy Director for school finance. I've now forgotten the name of the directorate. Kevin, come on, tell us who you work for.
Schools financial support and oversight. It's a lovely mouthful, isn't it?
It's a lovely mouthful, and I should know that, obviously, but failed there. We've had a few questions about reserves. Do you want to just talk to us about reserves and what you think the important points are to share with colleagues today?
Yeah, so I've noticed a couple of the points in the chat and kind of questions around reserves and sort of 5% and 20% being quoted, which are levels that clearly would have been quoted out there. But I should absolutely stress that we don't prescribe a level of reserves as the ESFA. We're always happy to work through and talk. I mean, obviously, it makes sense at a particular lower level, particularly given the challenges that some of you talked about in the chat today, that actually, we'd want an early conversation in relation to challenges around reserves and declining reserves, and inevitably at the other end of the spectrum as well. And this does exist out there, despite some of the sentiments. We do tend to have a conversation about reserves and ensure they're allocated and appropriately earmarked for higher levels of reserves. So I certainly would say that those quota levels of 5% to 20% that I've kind of seen in the chat, they aren't hard and fast rules. Obviously, you as trusts and trust leaders do have your own reserves policies, and you do need to adhere to that. Clearly, I kind of think given the challenging environment we're all trying to navigate, we'd definitely always encourage an early conversation if you see your reserves kind of running low. If you're having set deficit budgets, clearly in line with the handbook, do come and talk to us early as soon as you've got that, because we do want to have supportive conversations. We can deploy tools, including some of the SRM tools that have been talked about today, to sort of ensure we can support you on that. So I think my reflection on reserves would really be that is a local thing that we kind of look at on a case-by-case basis. But absolutely, if you've got challenges, concerns about the levels of your reserves, come and talk to us early, and we'll absolutely have a conversation about it.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. There was a comment earlier today about an experience working with the ESFA teams, and it didn't sound like a particularly brilliant experience. Do you want to just come back on that and maybe explain what the process is to offering someone support if they need it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would probably reflect on is the way our offer has changed over recent years. We some of you may have had experiences in the past, and we were certainly seen as the regulator in the past. But I kind of think probably half of you would have expected 3-4 years ago for us to be turning up to these sessions wearing police hats. That was very much the perception of ESFA, wasn't it? When we've really worked quite hard to try and move on from that. We've certainly sort of, and there's a mutual benefit there. Obviously there's a benefit in terms of hopefully we're able to support the sector in terms of working with us now a lot better, and certainly we're there, as I say, to try and have those early conversations and actually see if we can sort of work alongside you on a prevention basis. We've really tried to shift from intervention and sort of hard intervention that actually costs us a lot in terms of funding and resource to actually prevention, where actually we can work with you earlier and try and sort of nip some of these things in the bud, and actually sort of, you know, but it's been proven through our analysis over time that actually by doing that, by reducing the number of large-scale intervention cases that we work with in our division, and you know, I look after operational delivery in the West Midlands, the East Midlands, the South West. We've certainly seen a lot more of those, you know, really uncomfortable big cases coming through, and I think through that process and that shift, we're really sort of, you know, changing our offer to a support offer, and it's kind of one that's really important to us. And you know, by doing that, I think we're able to work with you hopefully in a slightly different way. And if that's not the experience, then you know, please do come back to us, because that's certainly not the intention of how we do want to work with you all as trusts, and certainly help you face some of the challenges that we've all talked about today.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to move us over to Bryn now. Now we've heard a lot about RAC, haven't we, in the news recently, and at least one person in the room has had personal experience of dealing with this. There was a question about what revenue costs we would pay, specifically about surveyor fees. I was just wondering if you could give us an overview about what's going on with RAC at the moment, and maybe what we can do to support any trusts that are having to deal with this particular challenge.
Certainly, thanks, Tanya. So I think the question was, will ESFA pay for RAC surveys? And I guess there's two parts to this. Firstly, as ever with this, ESFA is looking after the revenue, and then there is a separate capital pot. So the basic answer to the question is no, ESFA won't pay, because it will fall under capital funding for surveys specifically. But the good news is that as an exception due to the emergence of RAC over the summer, the department has agreed to fund responsible bodies up to £4,000 for a building survey, with the primary purpose of identifying RAC, and conducted between the 30th of August and the 1st of November to accelerate the identification of RAC. So if you have had a survey or within the last few months, then potentially it is refundable by the department, and the email for that is rac.awareness@education.gov.uk. So that's the capital side, and then over to the revenue side, which is where ESFA has been very involved. And as we're aware from September, the DfE announced some closures and the mitigations and the remediation of RAC, and also that we would cover all reasonable revenue costs, such as transport to temporary locations or renting of a temporary local hall or office, and that would be discussed with the RAC caseworker. So very quickly, ESFA stood up a team which worked closely with capital RAC caseworkers and with all responsible bodies to consider any reasonable requests. And since September, we've been working really closely to ensure that responsible bodies have that support and coverage, and that goes across maintained, trust, special, and any of the settings experiencing RAC. The process being that we will receive the estimates first, we'll seek approval, and then there's a drawdown facility for them afterwards. So yeah, we've worked really hard to try and support all settings affected as quickly as possible, and we're seeing some really good feedback from our pace on that.
Thank you very much, Bryn. I've got a follow-up question for you here. Will the RAC issue have an impact on the amount of SIF and SCA funding allocated over the following years?
So again, this will sit with capital colleagues. My understanding is that at the moment, the funding for RAC is in addition to the SIF and SCA funding, and the school's rebuilding programme will not be affected by it. The longer term, I think we need to get a line from capital on that, but my understanding is it isn't impacting at this time.
Thank you very much. We'll keep an eye on the chat and may come back to you shortly. Alison, I've got one that's just come in. Are SRMAs cost cutters?
Hi everyone. So no, I do think it's wrong to call our SRMAs cost cutters. It's something I'm quite passionate about, as I'm sure you can imagine. And they're definitely not inspecting or auditing you either. So they are experts. They've previously been or are still school business managers. I'm sure some of you here on the call are also SRMAs. So they understand the challenges of managing money and resources in a school or a trust. They've been in your shoes or are in your shoes now. Their role is really to help schools consider different ways to reduce the spend in areas where perhaps it isn't having as much impact as it might do, and think about how to shift that resource to things that will help deliver the best possible education. They'll also work with you to ensure that in your school or your trust there's the most efficient financial governance processes in place, and this can also provide boards with some assurance that the budget is being spent on the things that have the biggest impact. I think it's really not fair to describe these dedicated and experienced experts as cost cutters. So yeah, every time we get that question, I will always push back.
Okay, thank you very much, Alison. And what about, we had a question earlier about why do mentors need to be SRMAs? Do you have a view on that one as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So just to reassure people, really, this has been a practical and hopefully a temporary decision. It was taken to enable us to extend the mentoring offer this year. So we ran the pilot in the academic year 21-22, and we're looking for ways then to roll that out, because that was really successful, had great feedback. As many of the mentors were also SRMAs, we decided to roll the offer into the current SRMA contracts. And it's a kind of practical reasons we did that through a contract change, but it did limit options for us creating a different recruitment process for new mentors. But the good news is we recognise that that wasn't the ideal solution, really. So we are working on proposals now to re-procure the SRMA contracts. They run to the end of this academic year, and we want to put something in place to ensure that that can carry on. And as part of that planning, we are proposing to separate out the requirements for SRMAs and mentors. We think this means that those that may not have the capacity necessarily or don't simply aspire to become SRMAs, but still have that valuable experience to share, can again be mentors on the programme. So that is absolutely something that we're working towards.
Thank you. And we also have another question about, can you make decent ICFP tools free of charge? Any comments to help our colleagues on that one?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? So the department has some ICFP tools that we offer through our website. I think with ICFP, it's more than just the tools. It's about an approach to planning, and one tool doesn't necessarily suit everybody, every setting. I mean, again, to kind of come back to where the SRMAs can add value here. If you're working with an SRMA, they can work with you to look at the best approach. You don't have to, I think, use expensive tools to apply this general approach to planning. And it really is about understanding what your numbers are, how they relate to your schools, particularly in a trust. It's about comparing what's happening and ensuring there's some consistency across schools in trust, or if there isn't, understanding why. And so in terms of the tools, we have got some tools centrally there. There are other tools out there that you can buy into. I know some of the sector bodies, if for membership, their tools will be made available to members through membership. So because it's not one size fits all, I think it's difficult to then create something that's free through government that will be appropriate to everybody. Perhaps not the ideal, but yeah, that's where we are. We are continually taking on board feedback about the tools that we've got available. For example, looking at ways to include more appropriate tools that support SEN and AP, for example, but it is a work in progress, I think.
Lovely, thank you. And obviously the mentoring scheme can give you a bit of space to have a chat about what's specific for your circumstances as well, which can be helpful. Tom, I know you've been waiting for these questions. We have a few for you. I've given you a little rest, so now I've got a few to ask you. So can you clarify what you mean by rolling the MSAG into the NFF? Is that same amount being added to the national budget on top of the 1.4% increase?
Yes, and apologies if I've not been clear enough on that in my presentation. So the short answer to that is yes. The increase in of 1.4% is on top of taking account of the MSAG funding. So what it means is that to come up with the NFF rates for 24-25,
Colleagues, I'm sure he will come back. We have glitchy Wi-Fi at the moment. Just pause for a moment. There you go. You're back. You're back. Don't swear, Tom. Don't swear.
Sorry, I am desperately trying not to, Tanya, and in the middle of a quite complicated thing as well. So,
do you want to take a step back? So we have missed a little bit. So thank you.
So to calculate next year's NFF values, we've taken the values we have in the current year, 23-24, first added 1.4% to them, and then increased them further to take account of rolling in MSAG. So it is not the case that 1.4% includes the increase needed to roll in MSAG. Those two things are additional to one another and discrete.
Thank you very much for that clarification. We've also got another question here about, is the 16 to 19 teachers pension employer contribution grant continuing after March 24?
I do not know, I'm afraid, because I don't do the post-16 funding. What I do know is that it'll either be continuing as a separate grant, or in a similar way to what I've been describing with the NFF, colleagues who work on 16 to 19 funding will be adding it to the total that's available through the main 16 to 19 funding system. So I don't know the mechanism. I know it's certainly their ambition is to cease paying that as a separate grant and roll it in. I just don't know the timing that they're able to follow on that.
Okay, lovely. There's another question here about your thoughts around pupil premium being added into the main formula pot.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, and it's and there's a very obvious a parallel in that we use that ever 6 free school meal measure both in the pupil premium and in the national funding formula. It wouldn't be a particularly technically difficult thing to roll them in together. Two thoughts about that. One is that I know that some people say it feels a lot like double funding something, and I really would say I don't think it is. Obviously, we set them both in full knowledge. Indeed, it's the same team here who looks after them both. We set both those funding streams in full knowledge of the other one. So, yes, we're well aware that a child who is was eligible for free school meals in the last 6 years will both attract money through the NFF to their school or in relation to their school, and will do so through the pupil premium. Obviously, there is always the debate, which I think has been going on for many years, I'm aware of, and will go into the future, as to whether the right balance is struck between kind of funding for everyone and funding targeted deprivation. But that's a decision that government today has made, so it thinks the balance should be struck. The other thing about the pupil premium is, of course, it does come with some conditions. They're not, it's not a tightly ring-fenced funding, but that funding is supposed to be there to help the school benefit pupils who are eligible for free school meals. Whereas the funding in the NFF is much more there as a partial proxy for the likelihood of children the school having children with special educational needs who will need additional support. So they are serving two slightly distinct functions, and that's another reason why they've been kept separate to date. There is no current work in hand to merge the pupil premium into the NFF, but obviously I think that will continue to be something that is kept an eye on as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask you a question. I will come back to you later, but there's something here about the hard NFF. It's been promised for many years, not happened. Any wise words from you on that one?
I'm really glad we've had that question, because the first thing to say is I was clearly more thrown by my problems with connection, because I forgot to cover the last slide in my presentation, which spoke precisely about this. We are taking moves. The name has changed from a hard to a direct NFF. I won't go into the background to that, but we're calling it a direct NFF, where it's the national funding formula which is used to determine individual schools' budgets, and there will not be the kind of intervening layer of local authority, local funding formulae. We are working away to that. I described some of the moves we're doing, making sure that the local formula, in the meantime, making sure some of the local formulae use the same factors in NFF, and that the values that they apply to those factors are now converging on the NFF, and in about 2/3 of local areas have pretty well converged to the NFF now. We've not set ourselves a hard deadline for the final move for two reasons. The more important reason is because we want to take it carefully. We want to make sure this doesn't cause disruption unhelpfully, and that we can get there in a measured, controlled fashion, and making sure that we can see what the effects of each year's changes have been before we kind of go to the next step is very helpful to us in that. The second, also important, if in some ways a less of a priority reason, is that ultimately to fully remove the local authority role from setting individual schools' budgets will require primary legislation. The legislation for that was in the last schools bill, but that schools bill did not proceed. We will need to find another legislative opportunity before we can take that final step, and so that will also determine the ultimate timescale. But that is the direction we're going on, and those differences between different local authorities will be diminishing and continuing to diminish year by year.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of time to come back to some other questions as well. I was just going to pick up a comment on the chat about reserves, Kevin. I think you might have spotted that as well. Do you want to come back on that one? So just for the benefit of colleagues, if ESFA don't prescribe a percentile for reserves, why would we have received a notification from ESA that they are concerned our reserves are depleted? So do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I was just actually typing a response, Tanya, and obviously I can see it's from Pauline, so happy for Pauline to sort of make contact depending on exactly which region her trust is in and kind of who she might be working with. But I think my answer on that is that actually that's part of our pivot from intervention to proactively supporting trusts. So we're trying to identify trusts that are facing some of those challenges earlier, because we've definitely been able to prove that actually working with trusts earlier and on a supportive basis actually has more impact and can help us avoid some of the real pitfalls and difficulties that we faced over the course of some of our big intervention cases. So again, the idea of an SRMA in this context is actually about something that would really help you understand kind of how we can work through and actually hopefully sort of point to some of the knowledge that we've accumulated from other similar sort of peer cases, and hopefully run that through. So again, Pauline, if I'm sort of talking across anything that's specific about your circumstances, as I do absolutely get in touch. I'll post that response in the chat and kind of we can pick up accordingly. But that's definitely sort of in my view an example of us trying to work on a proactive and supportive basis with you.
Lovely, thank you. I mean, just from my own personal point of view, when I many years ago, when I was sort of doing Kevin's job but in the southwest and the southeast, there weren't the tools that we have now to be able to support trusts, and very much the focus of ESFA was about supporting those trusts which were in deficit only. We've moved a long way from that. We're trying to move away from the intervention aspect, so we're supporting trusts before they get into that position. And I have to say, just from my own personal perspective, that has to be the right answer. We're helping schools, and to avoid that sort of cliff edge. And we've had some huge successes in that space using all the tools across the piece. So please don't sit on this, do come to us. If we come to you, it's take it in the spirit it's meant, which is supportive. And, you know, we'll always engage with you to try and help where we can. Bryn, we've got a question for you about surveys done prior to August 2023. Do you have a comment on that one at all, on whether they're covered?
So my understanding is that they're not, but I would suggest that any queries, particularly because that sits with the capital team at the moment, go through the RAC awareness email. They'll be able to give some clear lines on that. Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you very much.
I can't, so just on the, I think there was a question as well about revenue, which is, so on the revenue, evidence for revenue, I think someone's asked what evidence we require. So following approval of estimated spend, we will, on evidence of spend, will release the payments, so such as invoices, receipts, etc. But what I would say is where we are dealing with revenue costs, there will be a caseworker assigned to the responsible body from SFSO who work with them to ensure that we get the right evidence for it. So any questions on that, to speak to their SFSO colleague. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Bryn. Alison, you've sort of answered this in the chat, but I thought it might be worthy just to coming back to it, because it is an important part of the SRMA experience, isn't it? The potential follow-up from the recommendations. Yeah. Do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about the process and why that happens?
Yeah, sure. So we, for the last, I guess, nearly a couple of years now, we've offered a 6-month follow-up visit for every school and trust that has an SRMA, a sort of full or bespoke SRMA visit. And that is, it's not compulsory. Schools and trusts don't have to accept that, but we will offer that. And that is a sort of short conversation with the SRMA to be able to talk through the report, what the school or trust has done with that since, whether the recommendations are useful or not, whether they're being implemented or not, whether the situation has changed. And so we offer that as something that we hope would be helpful as a sort of follow-up. The recommendations, I should also say, and we say this a lot, is they're not for us to check up on schools and trusts either. They are meant as suggestions, recommendations. That's exactly what they are, for schools and trusts to consider. Some of those schools will decide that they're right for them and will take forward, and some won't. I think the question in the chat, I think, is talking about a situation where some of the school leaders might sort of dismiss recommendations, where perhaps the finance team actually would rather they took those forward and did more with that. So, you know, is it easy for a school or trust to dismiss something? And I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because we would want schools to take forward recommendations that are going to help them deliver a better education outcome, but also if a trust is not in financial difficulty, we're certainly not going to force those things to be put into place if that's not what the leadership thinks. And so I appreciate those conversations can be tricky. We're always open to offering kind of follow-up visits. If you want to get back in touch with us, we can put you in touch, and we can set up visits with an SRMA that's worked with you. And I know our cohort of SRMAs is always willing to, or they find that follow-up really valuable. I think they've said that to me. They're interested in seeing how things are going and how what they've advised initially can actually support schools in the longer term. But do get in touch if there's a specific case that you want, you'd like us to take another look at.
Lovely, thanks, Alison. I'm going to move this on to Sen now, and Tom, I'll just ask Alison a quick question, then I'll come over to you. But if you remember in the Menti poll, there was a lot of comments around SEN funding and the pressures associated with that. Alison, just staying with you for a moment, have you got any advice for those colleagues who have particular challenges in the SEN space?
It is a tricky one, isn't it? I think again, this comes back to benchmarks for SEND, and there is another question in the chat about whether we can publish benchmarks that are used, and the answer to that is perhaps not the one that people want to hear, but because context is key, it's very difficult to say this is what you should be aspiring to, this is exactly what you need to do, and if you hit these numbers, these metrics, these figures, then all will be well. I don't think we're pretending in the slightest that that's where things are, and I know that in the SEND space that's particularly tricky. I was at the ISPOS conference the other day, and one of our SRMAs was giving a talk on metrics and ICFP, and somebody asked the question, how do we use some of these tools to manage what's a tricky situation in the SEND space? And the advice there was, work with others that have similar schools, and I know context, one SEND school can be very different from another. So it is about trying to share that experience. Again, SRMA support can help. We've got SRMAs who work in and specialise in SEND settings, SEND funding. Compare like with like. So if you have schools across a trust, it is really helpful to look and see what's similar and what's different, and use that as a starting point to try and unpick what will work best. Some of our SRMAs recently also were talking about innovative solutions to bring SEND provision together in trusts that perhaps have a mixed offer, thinking about congregating SEND expertise in units in schools to maximise the expertise, support, and the money that goes into that as well. I mean, they're just a few things that I have heard in conversations recently that no doubt many of you will be looking at and trying already. I won't pretend it's not a tricky area.
Lovely, thank you, Alison. And Tom, on the issue of SEND funding, do you want to just update us on your thinking?
Yeah, I think what Alison just said, which it's a tricky area, is absolutely true. It is striking the growth in spending by local authorities and by schools over the last few years on SEND, the growth in the number of children being identified as requiring an EHCP, and I think now we're also seeing a wider growth in the number of children being identified as having any form of SEND at all by schools, and combining with that, obviously the pressures that is placing both local authorities and schools' budgets under, and combining with that no great evidence of an upswing in satisfaction from parents of children with SEND. So it's a very difficult situation at the moment. Obviously, the department's been doing a lot of work on this, and we published our SEND green paper. Was it last year? A little while ago now, and since then an improvement plan. So there's quite a lot being looked at and taken forward in the policy side of things to try and move the whole system to a better place, one in which the investment that we can make and we should be making for some of the obviously the very most vulnerable children at all is delivering what those children need and leading to better outcomes for them, which I don't think we believe the system is setting people up to do that as best as it could at the moment. It's necessarily going to be a long-term prospect. This is many people describe this as a super tanker that will take a long time to turn around, and I think that is probably the right metaphor. In the meantime, we are going to continue to be pressing for the largest funding increases we can get, of course, both in terms of those children with EHCPs, but also the support that goes to mainstream schools for all their children, including those with SEND. We are also looking specifically at the moment at what those changes those policy changes should mean for the funding system, because the funding system must always follow policy, otherwise it's not doing its job. And specifically within that, we're starting to think, we're very conscious that the position for special schools has become very, very complex over the last few years. And certainly our ambition is to find a way to simplify the system, giving special schools, greater certainty and an easier system to work within. Again, it's a really big job. That'll be really complicated. And across all of this, I think there is a recognition that the last set of SEND reforms created a set of drove to not the outcomes that were wanted. They were done with their absolute best intentions, and I don't think anyone argues with the objectives, but I think the general view is they have not managed to deliver. They are not delivering on those objectives, and we've got to avoid that happening again. Reform is needed, but it has to be careful reform that will work. I'd love to be able to say there is a quick answer that I can give that will make these problems go away. That is not the situation, so I'm not going to pretend that it is. I can reassure people that the department is very seized of those problems with SEND at the moment and putting a lot of effort into tackling them.
Thanks, Tom. I think we are rapidly running out of time, but I did have one further question for you, and it's more of a clarification. We've had a lot of questions asking for clarification on the teachers' pay grant and whether it covers support staff pay.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've garbled what we've been trying to say here, so I will say it one more time, and let us hope that I don't garble it again. Teachers' pay grant has been calculated by reference to the Teachers' Pay Award. So it is the difference between 6.5% pay award made in September and an assumed average 3.5% award being affordable within schools' budgets. So it is, that's why it says Teachers' Pay on the lid. If you like, it's about the Teachers' Pay Award. That said, when we calculated how much teacher pay award would be affordable nationally, that calculation took account of the 23-24 pay offer for support staff, local authority support staff. But as I said, we use that as our proxy across the piece. So it isn't a grant for support staff, but the total amount being provided was calculated with an eye to the pay award for support staff and other pressures as well. And the other thing to note is, as we try and do in the core schools budget area, there's no ring fence around the usage of the grant. So the teachers' pay grant arrives at schools as a overall increase to their funding to be used against whatever pressures or expenditure is best in necessary or best in that school. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to our panel. Somehow we've managed to fill 40 minutes. It's all gone very quickly, and we haven't even touched all the questions that have come in completely. So I'm sorry to those we haven't been able to turn to your questions, but we will continue to try and answer those in the chat. You will get the delegate packs in due course with all the links. I've got one question here I just wanted to pull out, I guess, for myself. It's great to see that ESFA staff with real people. We are real. Kevin, Alison, Bryn, we are definitely real. I've seen you in person. We are here. And I think the question was more about how difficult it is sometimes to contact the ESFA in the inquiry service. I mean, obviously that is the way into the ESFA. There are lots of links that we've given you today that actually are straight to email boxes, which are managed by the teams of the individuals you've spoken to. So do use them. The slides contain them. And I know Alison, Kevin, Bryn, Tom, myself, and lots of others across the ESFA, especially David. He spends a lot of his time out of the office and in the sector talking to people. When we're there, come and talk to us. We are definitely real people, and I am always willing to have a conversation with anyone. I really value the feedback we've had today. I value the feedback we get during those events. And the only way we can support you is for you to be honest with us, which you have been, and it's been great. And we will consider all of the information, all the comments, all the questions you've given us, and we will continue to try and support you as best we can. We're not going to get it right all the time, we're just not, but we absolutely want to try to do that. So please help us help you. And I think there was somewhere in the chat as well about, you know, just it feels good not to be alone. You're absolutely not alone. We can facilitate networks. We've got mentoring to support you. We've got SRMAs. We've got these events. We've got the power hours that happen every month where we can signpost you into recent developments and recent events. And we have these networking events as well. I'm going to pop some feedback into the channel. There's a form there, the inevitable feedback form. What's really important is for you to give us some honest feedback and also what you want to see from us going forward so we can help support you in the way I've described. What's coming next? We've got the Academy Finance Professional December Power Hour. I'm afraid I won't be able to join you for that one, and I'm afraid it's my birthday, and my husband has told me I can't work that day because he's got something special to treat me with. So I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure colleagues will be able to ably take you through that particular event. I'm absolutely enjoyed the last 2.5 hours. It really has been great. But I guess my final comments are just around everyone who's helped support today. Thank you very much to the panel, to Paul. I'm not sure if he's still online, but I think your session went down brilliantly. For all the people who have put this together, especially the IT support colleagues and those who have been in the chat answering all of your questions. There is an army behind us, and they have performed admirably as ever. And of course, thank you to you for everything you do every day to support the education our children rightly deserve. Keep safe, everybody. Do try to keep warm. And it might be too early to wish you Merry Christmas, but I can't help myself. So have a very Merry Christmas when you get there. Enjoy. Bye-bye, everyone.